The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 34. Monikers, Memories, Mutually Assured Destruction. The first week of the Easter holidays had been surprisingly pleasant. Most of the students not facing OWL and NEWT exams had left, eager for a break from Professor Umbitch, as she was commonly called in private among the students. Whilst Hermione had spent most of her time studying, she'd still found time to get away to see him. Even better, she'd shared the knowledge of the Room of Requirement with him. They'd enjoyed several hours of snogging and more in there, and the daydreams of those hours had caught him unawares Monday evening whilst he was meant to be studying. "Drake, mate." It was Blaise. They were the only two in the dormitory at the moment. Doubtlessly, Greg was off with Vince setting fires to some trees or something somewhere. Theo was in a secluded corner of the library with his Witch of the Week, a raven-haired fourth-year Hufflepuff. "Yeah." Draco surfaced from his reverie, almost surprised to find himself not alone in the room. "You've got to clear your mind, mate. If I have to relive what you and Hermione Granger get up to one more time—" "Sod off out of my head, you wanker!" Draco angrily threw a book hard at Blaise, who snickered as he avoided it deftly. Blaise laughed. "Sorry, mate, but I told you. When your thoughts are incredibly loud, it's really difficult to avoid overhearing. Speaking of which, is there any word from your mother about your aunt?" Draco gave him a hard stare. "How did you know about that?" Blaise tapped his head lightly, then pointed to Draco's head, with a small smile. "Right," Draco said, tight-lipped. "A word of advice? You need to look into occlumency, mate. It's going to be important for the future. Especially for you. I think you know why." Blaise gestured to his lower left arm, vaguely. A chill ran up Draco's spine at Blaise's implication of the sign of Voldemort's army. He was right, of course. "Professor." Draco knocked lightly on the dungeon door, just off the potions classroom. It was late, but Professor Snape was sitting at his desk, grading essays. "Mr. Malfoy," Snape drawled, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I've heard from a friend that you're an expert in occlumency. I find myself in need of your help in that regard." Draco moved slowly into the room, maintaining his eye contact with his favorite professor. "Yes, I've been expecting you to seek me out. I just so happen to have my evenings free once again." "Have a seat." Professor Snape spoke with the slowest cadence possible, and Draco fought not to roll his eyes in annoyance at Snape's dramatic effect. Snape moved swiftly to him in less than a moment, standing toe-to-toe with Draco. "You may think that the way I act is odd, Draco, but I assure you that there is a method to the madness. When the need arises for occlumency, and you are untrained in the art, you allow your thoughts and your feelings to run wild, to get ahead of your mind. If you do not know what you are doing, it will already be too late to save yourself, or anyone you care about." Professor Snape looked down and touched his index finger to Draco's chest, directly above where his handkerchief lay. "When the time comes that you are called upon, you will need to shield your thoughts. You must utilize all of your resources. It will be the greatest skill at your disposal, because there likely won't be time to send a warning to anyone." Snape had his full attention now. Draco had had the feeling before that Professor Snape knew more than he was letting on about Draco's loyalties to Hermione. Now, he'd all but spoken her name aloud. "You're right, sir. I apologize." Draco dropped his eyes. "There is no need for an apology, Draco. I only need you to provide the utmost protection for your Muggleborn. It is your greatest responsibility, one at which you must not fail. Believe me, if you do, it will haunt you." Draco felt his stomach clench. Snape had always seemed dramatic and on edge. It seemed, however, that perhaps there was a good reason for that. Draco devoted much of his Easter holidays to occlumency lessons with Professor Snape, something that he thought would make Hermione happy. He was surprised on Saturday afternoon, then, when she expressed mild annoyance at learning where he'd been spending his time. They were lying back to front on a low, wide sofa, in front of a roaring fireplace, in the room of requirement. "He's supposed to have been teaching that to Harry as well. I don't know that Harry is fully able to close his mind like he should." Hermione bit her lip, fretting once again about the scar-headed git. "Professor Snape seems pretty knowledgeable about it all, If Potter and Snape feel like he's got it well enough to work on his own." "What did you say?" If they think he can do it alone." "No, what did you call me?" She turned bodily to him with a huge smirk on her face. "What? What of it?" he scoffed jokingly. "You do realize your name is 4 blasted syllables. In the time I'll save shortening it to 1, think of all the other things I can do with my mouth." To demonstrate, he kissed her neck just under her ear, where she was most ticklish. She shrieked with mock outrage and laughter, digging her elbows into his ribs. He curled inwards to fight off her onslaught, chuckling. She rolled to face him, and kissed him deeply for several moments, then pulled away. "I am glad you're doing the lessons, Draco. I know if you ever come in contact with certain people, it'll be vital." He smiled down at her, silver eyes promising everything unspoken between them. Then he kissed her once again, pulling her to lie closer to him. "Draco, oh, sorry, I should just say Co, should I not?" She smirked playfully at him. "You're only saving 50% of your time, I think you'd have better ways to save it. Maybe give up lecturing people on elf rights or something," he laughed. "You're an asshole, Draco Malfoy." She smacked his chest firmly. "Well, now you're just going far too much in the wrong direction, love. That's twice the number of syllables you need." She kissed him hard, then, running her hands along his side in a way that sent electric bolts throughout his body. Her lips trailed down the smooth planes of his chest, curls lightly brushing against his abdomen in a way that electrified him even more. Her mouth trailed languidly down his body, and the sight of her, of the adoration in her eyes, stole his breath. She was so amazing, and he never wanted this moment and these feelings of pleasure to end. After a few minutes, she pulled back, smiling down at him as he struggled not to lose his mind under her. Their eyes met as he fell over a precipice of ecstasy, her soft moans pulsing through him. "My God, you're so wonderful." "Just my is fine," she giggled, as she unfolded herself from the end of the sofa and stood up to go. He did as well, capturing her in his arms to hold her close. His eyes closed for a moment, then popped back open, just in case she disappeared like a daydream. She tilted her head back to kiss him once more. He tightened his arms around her, holding her close, never wanting to let her go. "Mr. Malfoy, I beg of you, please endeavor to close your mind. I understand that it has been an enjoyable holiday, but I demand that you focus." Professor Snape was rubbing his temples in large circles as though hoping to erase the images of Hermione in his brain. Draco felt his face flame. It was Saturday night, only hours after he and Hermione had left the room of requirement, separately to avoid detection. Now he was expected to forget her, to close his mind off from those memories and feelings. "Sorry, Professor." "Indeed, Draco," Snape said sarcastically. "Have you given more thought to what we discussed last time we met? You need to build your memory fortress. It must be strong, a place, or an item like a bookshelf that you know well, so well that you can store thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of memories inside, and never let them out. Have you chosen such a place or thing?" There's a potions kit, with storage spaces and drawers." Draco brought the image of his travel potions kit forward in his mind for Professor Snape to examine. He felt the probe of legitimacy, then felt, as the older wizard withdrew, "No! This was a gift from her. Your memory of this is entangled with your memory of her. It will never do." Snape was right, of course. "All right. This was also a gift, but I have no memory of the giver." He brought forward in his mind the wooden box hidden deep within his closet back in Wiltshire, with its collection of muggle books. He flipped through the pages of the books in his mind, feeling the gentle disturbance of the air as the pages moved swiftly in his grasp. "No!" Professor Snape's fist crashed onto the desk between them. "Are you mental? This item could endanger not just you, but your mother as well. Not to mention—" The elder wizard stopped himself from continuing. "I had no idea that she— But it is no matter. Come up with something else." Draco closed his eyes. A place he knew. A place he felt comfortable. A place with many hiding places within. Just like that, he had it. An image formed in his mind, that of the school's potions cupboard. Draco had always had an affinity for potions. It was the one subject in which he'd almost always taken the top grade. There might have been some in other houses that assumed this was because Draco was Snape's favorite, but it simply wasn't true. From a young age, Draco had memorized ingredients, researched different ways of mixing them to find new solutions. It was the purest, most straightforward type of magic, and he truly enjoyed it. He opened his eyes, inviting Snape to see what he'd chosen. Yes, this will work for you well, Mr. Malfoy. Now, I need for you to find a memory, one that you don't want others to find. I don't want to see it. Place it inside one of those vials." Draco pictured an alcove, a crying witch, an offered handkerchief. He imagined distilling the images down to liquid, watched as they melted into droplets. "Now, remove anything from the memory that you do not wish anyone to find." Professor Snape's voice seemed both inside and outside his head. Draco used a dropper to extract a few drops of the vial, placing them in another empty vial nearby. "Now, show me the memory," Snape commanded. There was an alcove, a handkerchief, and nothing else. No sounds of crying, no orbs of copper, no words of thanks. Draco understood what he needed to do. Chapter 35. Career Aims, Swamp Stains, Crazy Claims, and Quidditch Games. If Draco thought that Professor Snape didn't care for Potter before Potter quit his occlumency lessons, that was nothing compared to the pure waves of loathing coming from the professor now. In their next potions class, Potter had stirred up what appeared to be a perfect potion, depositing the vial on Professor Snape's desk. Snape waved a hand over it, not even touching it, and the vial crashed to the ground, depositing Potter's solution, useless, on the floor. It was too much. Draco guffawed with laughter. He didn't even stop when he realized that Hermione had vanished the rest of Potter's solution, meaning that there was no more to turn in. It was just too funny. Hermione and Potter both gave him ugly looks, and he was sure he would hear from his witch about this later. An announcement for fifth years went up on the Slytherin common room notice board. They were to have careers advice with their heads of house. All meetings would also be attended by the High Inquisitor. Draco knocked on Professor Snape's door at the allotted time, opening it to find Snape at his desk and Professor Umbridge in a small chair in the back of the room, her pink notebook in hand. He schooled his features to hide his disgust, calling upon his occlumency almost naturally in the face of this horrible witch. Mr. Malfoy, please sit. I trust you have had a chance to look over the careers brochures provided to you. Yes, Professor. And are there any professions that interest you? Well, Professor, I presume that I will need to take over my family business when I'm older. At this, Draco could almost feel the toad-like witch behind him leaning forward eagerly at the discussion of an ancient, wealthy, Sacred 28 family business. That may be true, although some tasks could be delegated. And presumably it will be many years before you are called upon to take this over entirely. Is there any profession that interests you in the meantime? Draco met his professor's eyes and understood. Professor Snape knew that his loyalties were not entirely within his pureblood family, and that the time may come when he could not count on being a member of the Malfoy family legacy, and enjoying its wealth any longer. The idea of this brought him up short. It was something he had thought to be a long ways in the future. Now he realized that, in truth, he only had 2 years of school remaining. Typically speaking, purebloods were betrothed soon after they reached majority age, if not before. They were often married by their 21st birthdays. Seeing as the only witch he was interested in pursuing was a muggle-born, it seemed unlikely that Lucius would be offering him a multi-million galleon business in the near future. I've always been interested in potions. Perhaps I could pursue a Master Potioneer certification. Yes, I think that would be highly useful to you, replied Professor Snape. Another thought came into Draco's mind, and a small smile crept up on his face. I also find that catching wrongdoers, those using dark magic nefariously, to be rewarding. Perhaps I could look into the Aura program. He felt Professor Umbridge stiffen behind him. Then he heard a scratch of her pen, and she did her little noise in her throat. I believe Mr. Malfoy might be well suited to become an Aura. He has performed his duties as leader of the Inquisitorial Squad quite well, I may say. Yes. Professor Snape pursed his lips thoughtfully. There may come a time that the Aura program needs someone of your talents, Mr. Malfoy. The two wizards' eyes met with a frisson of understanding between them. The final Quidditch match of the year for Slytherin was against Hufflepuff. Warrington was named the interim captain, seeing as Montague was still in hospital. They needed a replacement keeper, so Warrington brought in Millie. Millie, in ordinary circumstances, would have made an excellent keeper had she not been so distracted by the presence of her now ex-boyfriend as one of the beaters. Apparently, she thought Greg was ogling the raven-haired Hufflepuff that Theo had just dropped. The thing between Millie and Greg had not ended well. The two of them had rowed in the common room for hours the night before the match, and they played like it. Any time Greg came up the pitch towards her, Millie moved towards him, to fuss at him, leaving their Quidditch hoops unguarded. Draco rushed to locate the snitch, catching it right after Hufflepuff scored their 15th goal, making it a tie game. Unfortunately, in an uncanny imitation of Cormac McLaggen from the Gryffindor Hufflepuff match, Millie had grabbed Greg's beater's bat. She was attempting to hit him with it, but caught the shoulder of the Hufflepuff chaser instead. The Hufflepuff chaser who happened to be the unwitting source of their fight. Hufflepuff was awarded a penalty shot and won the match, 160 to 150. Morale amongst the inquisitorial squad was at an all-time low. One of their members was still in hospital, babbling like a buffoon to anyone who was willing to listen. Pansy and Warrington were on again, off again dating, her personality proving too much even for the bland demeanour of Warrington. 2 other members of the squad were permanently on the outs, as Millie wanted nothing to do with Greg, and Greg still wasn't sure what he'd done wrong, as he'd never actually ogled the girl in question, no more so than anyone else, at least. One of the members had less intelligence than Devil's Snare, Draco thought ruefully, watching Vince one evening in the common room as he attempted to untie his shoes for at least the 20th time, not realizing that the bows were decorative and were sewn tied. And he, Draco, who was actively rooting for the squad to implode. All in all, their future as a group did not look bright. The events of the day had gone a long way to bringing down the squad, and indeed Umbridge herself. It had started like many other days, with the 5th years wishing that someone would come along and put them out of their misery, when suddenly someone did. Well, 2 someones, as a matter of fact. It began with an odd green sludge appearing at the door of the arithmancy classroom. It seeped under the door and across the threshold, bubbling and seeming to grow deeper as it crept. Small plants began to sprout from it, and if one looked deeply within its depths, frogs, toads, and snakes could be seen squirming inside. Draco looked sideways at Hermione, mystified. By the time the class realized what was happening, they had had to wade out of the door in knee-deep brackish goo to reach the stone floor of the corridor several doors down. The swamp was expanding, creeping down the stairs and swallowing suits of armor and statues whole in its wake. What's more, it really stank. Reeked, in fact. Draco had had to hold in his laughter as he watched classmate after classmate emerge from whatever small swamp they found themselves in, covered in the green goo, the occasional toad hopping out of their pockets, cattails and reeds in their hair. The silver cat showed up almost instantly, pawing its way through the green goo on the ground. Professor Umbridge's voice sounded frantic. There was no time for her usual mincing of words. "Mr. Malfoy! Assemble your squad, now! I need you to find the wrongdoers of this atrocity immediately!" Draco laughed heartily. He knew exactly who the culprits were, and knew that they would only be found when they were good and ready. He settled himself with walking leisurely down the stairs towards the entrance hall, calling out to the other squad members as he passed, telling them to meet him downstairs. Sure enough, as the crowd assembled, there they stood, matching red hair standing on end in apparent glee at seeing their creation come to fruition. Draco locked eyes with Hermione, tears of silent laughter streaming down her face, mixing with the swamp sap. Draco dared not open his mouth to laugh, lest some of the sap get inside. They looked at each other as if to say, "Of course this happened, and what next?" Professor Umbridge and the Weasley twins were arguing, whilst August Filch muttered to himself in the background, and Draco turned his attention back to the matter at hand. Of course, he thought. This was what was next. A loud, zooming noise blasted behind him, and he ducked and swerved to avoid being knocked sideways by the Weasleys' brooms, the very same ones he had made fun of in his 2nd year. "If anyone fancies buying a portable swamp, as demonstrated upstairs, come to number 93, Diagon Alley, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, our new premises," Fred, or maybe George, said. "Special discounts to any Hogwarts students who swear they're going to use our products to get rid of this old bat," George, or Fred, added. Draco gave the tiniest of salutes to him. Warrington and Vince lunged forwards as though to grab them, but the twins kicked off from the ground, causing the 2 squad members to fall forwards into a small pile of goop. The twins yelled something to Peeves the poltergeist, and blasted their way out the open front doors, soaring off across the Black Lake, whilst cheers erupted around them. Draco turned to head for the prefect's bath. It seemed like as good a time as any for freshening up a bit. Over the next few days, as though their path had been illuminated by the Weasley twins, the student body banded together in solidarity against Umbridge. Messes were made, dung bombs were set off, students were throwing up en masse the moment she walked into the room. Unfortunately for Draco and the rest of the inquisitorial squad, this meant that, as her representatives, they were under attack as well. Draco just tried to keep his head down and not attract too much attention to himself. This resulted in only a handful of stinging jinxes, and one particularly inventive jinx that made small wings grow off of his ankles, like a living version of the Greek god Hermes. This was remedied quickly by Madame Pomfrey. Pansy received a glorious pair of antlers from some creative hexer, but it was Warrington who suffered the most. His hands were covered in large pustules and great crusty scabs that looked slightly familiar to Draco. That night in bed, he took out his handkerchief and asked her, "Warrington's hands today. Any idea how they got that way? I seem to recall in 4th year you receiving a howler that resulted in a similar problem. You wouldn't know anything about it, would you?" Her reply came a few moments later. "I'm sure that I do not know what you mean. If your friend Warrington was such an obtuse idiot as to open a letter addressed to him with a small quantity of wardcap powder inside, then I don't know what to say for his inquisitorial squad future." "Have I ever told you that you would have made an excellent Slytherin?" "I believe the topic has come up, yes." It had been up to Draco to take Warrington up to the hospital wing for the antidote for the warp-cat powder. Whilst there, he stopped a moment to visit with Montague. The poor bloke had become calmer than in the first days out of the U-bend, but his story never really wavered. He was seated now, talking to a ghost, one that Draco recognized as the Gryffindor ghost, the one whose head had not entirely parted company with his body, the one who'd been petrified with Justin years before. Now Draco stopped to listen more closely. Montague reiterated the 2 identical imps that had pushed him into a cupboard or cabinet of some sort, and held the door closed so that he could not get out. Time and space seemed to stretch out for Montague here, and he was uncertain if he spent minutes or months within the cabinet. He spoke of hearing strange voices, transactions in a shop, discussions about cursed necklaces and poisonous tea kettles. At other times he could hear strange creatures scuttling about, broken toys trying to mend themselves, broken wireless and Victrola machines that played odd scraps of music or voices from a different time, mournful ghosts lamenting that they could never be found again, that they were stuck in this place of forgotten things. At this, the ghost nodded his head sagely, his noggin barely staying put above his ruff. "Oh, yes, you know, I recall that cabinet. I remember only a few years ago I convinced Peeves, the poltergeist, to drop it, when a dear friend of mine needed a distraction. I believe it's now in the Room of Hidden Things. I must wonder how in the world you ended up in there." Hermione had told him once about the Death Day party for this ghost, and how he seemed to have a serious need for acceptance from the other ghosts and students. Draco wished the ghost would leave Montague alone. He didn't need his delusions fed to grow even larger. Though he was only 16 and had never taken an apparition course, it seemed that Montague had finally managed to disapparate whilst he was listening to 2 men discussing dark artifacts, and he'd ended up splinched in that U-bend. Draco shuddered to know what to think about Montague. What could make a wizard go mental like that? It was the final Quidditch match of the year, Gryffindor against Ravenclaw. Gryffindor miraculously had a chance to win if they defeated Ravenclaw soundly enough, Draco, as one of the 5 remaining members of the 7-person inquisitorial squad, Warrington's hands still recovering in the hospital wing, was forced to sit with Umbridge, as she thought it was likely that the student body would wreak havoc and attack her out in the open if she didn't have protection. To be entirely honest, Draco was surprised that she'd even allowed this match to be played. He was certain, however, that she believed Gryffindor would be soundly defeated. She likely relished the idea of the 2 remaining Weasley siblings being embarrassed by the loss. The Slytherins half-heartedly started a round of Weasley is our king, but Draco could not be asked to care. He looked into the Gryffindor section, seeking out her wild mane of curly hair in the crowd. He was momentarily distracted by the crowd reacting to a Ravenclaw scoring a goal, but then returned to his search. He spotted her near the top, sitting next to Potter. As he watched, Hagrid appeared and began shuffling his way towards the pair. Draco had to wonder what this was about, as Hagrid usually stayed in his hut during Quidditch matches, knowing that the buzz and fervour bothered Fang. Hagrid spoke briefly to Hermione and Potter, then the 3 of them stood and made as if to leave. Hermione caught his eye and gave him an "I don't know" gesture. Draco turned hurriedly to Professor Umbridge. "Professor, explain to me again how exactly the final house points are to be awarded this year. Will you be excluding OWL test results?" Given any chance to discuss her power to award or take away house points, Professor Umbridge could be counted upon to become carried away and wax on for several minutes at a time. As she launched into a discussion of points totals, ratios, and weighted test scores, Draco looked past her and made brief eye contact with Hermione, who touched the cuff of her jumper. He nodded at her whilst Umbridge blathered on. Hopefully she appreciated this little distraction. The match continued in front of them, with the Weasel suddenly on fire with his keeping abilities. Ravenclaw was struggling and called a time-out. Draco's ears were starting to hurt from Umbridge's voice. Seeing Pansy smirking behind Umbridge, Draco took his chance. "Professor, I overheard Pansy here saying that she was hoping you'd be interested in implementing a class for society witches next year. You know, learning the basics of running a magical household, organizing charity events, planning weddings, that sort of thing." Pansy, who likely would rather get eaten by the giant squid than learn any more of that than she already knew from years of etiquette classes, gave him a look of sheer loathing. Professor Umbridge turned to Pansy, a look of delight on her face. "What a lovely idea, Miss Parkinson! You know, I feel so strongly about that myself, having come from a long line of coat-tail riders and ass-kissers," Draco thought, returning the smirk to Pansy with interest. At this rate, Hermione and Potter could be gone for days with Hagrid, and Professor Umbridge would never notice. Even Gryffindor House winning the Quidditch Cup and hoisting the Weasel on their shoulders to carry him inside the castle didn't spoil his mood too badly. Any day that someone got one over on Professor Umbridge was a good day indeed. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great78.